Good morning, church. Are you hearing me out there? What a joy, indeed, what a joy it is to be with you this morning. As Casey said, I've been around Charlotte forever. And in fact, most of you don't know me. It has been 20 years since I was the youth minister here at Providence United Methodist Church. I was here for 7 years. I mean, the decades come, the decades go. Where did the time go? But I love this church. I love this church, and that's why I'm here today. Even though I'm not serving a church, we're back. I love this church. Some pretty significant things happened in my life during those 7 years that I was here. I got married. My wife Laura is in the house, and there she is. Oh yeah, there it is. And in just a week, we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary. And I got married while I was here, so that's a pretty special time for us coming up. I also went through the ordination process while I was here and became an official rev. So some pretty special moments, but really it's been the relationships that have endured over these 20 years that are most special. Particularly think about the youth that were youth here during that time who are now parents of youth who are youth ministry age, and some like Tate Eford, who's in the house this morning, who is the son of Scott Eford, and Scott, I used to beat him regularly in basketball, and he was a youth here. I was merciless. And we had some great years together. I love Scott, and now the opportunity to be with Tate and to have spent the past year as a mentor to Tate is pretty exciting, and something that youth ministers, it's pretty exclusive to us in a lot of ways, pretty special time. So that's all to say that the love runs deep. So where am I now? Casey already gave it away. I work at the Men's Shelter of Charlotte. We provide emergency housing to men 365 days a year, 24/7. We never close. Our goal is not to manage homelessness, but to end homelessness for each man who comes our way. It's been by far the most challenging work of my life. We work from a simple equation: housing plus income plus support equals an end to homelessness, and I work on the income part of that equation. So I'm out there introducing employers in the community to our workforce at the shelter, and I'm also engaging and introducing our men to all the opportunities that are out there for them to find meaningful work and even new careers. It's very, as Casey said, it is very exciting work. And if that strikes a chord with you and you go, wow, I employ people, I would love to talk. If that strikes a chord with you, I would love to talk with you afterwards. And so I was giving a guest one of our 25-year-old guests, a ride over to Goodwill Opportunity Center over on Wilkinson Boulevard several weeks ago. And while we were in the car, we were just getting to know each other. And he was going over there. Goodwill, if you know, offers a variety of certification courses that assist folks in making more money and offering them more opportunities at better jobs, better careers. And in the course of our conversation, he asked me, well, you know, why do you work at the men's shelter? I know you don't make a lot of money, so why do you work at the men's shelter instead of working somewhere else where you could make more money? And that got us talking about the difference between making a life and making a living. And just what does constitute a fulfilling life, a rich life? Is it only a matter of making more money? And dang if that doesn't serve as a great segue into our topic of the morning, the parable of the rich fool, as it's often called. And I suppose this parable should come with a warning of sorts. Yes, a warning. So church, hear this cautionary word from author Annie Dillard. She says this: it is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. or chairs in this instance. For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense, or the waking God may draw us to where we can never return. We should all be wearing crash helmets, for the waking God may draw us to where we can never return. Okay, church, are you buckled in? You got those crash helmets adjusted? So here goes. The parable of the rich fool. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And then he told him a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" And then he said, "I'll do this. I'll pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.'" Well, the setting for this parable this morning is important, so let's start with the setting, shall we? A man comes to Jesus with a request. He wants Jesus to settle a dispute. "Teacher, tell my brother to give me my fair share of the family inheritance." And Jesus has no interest whatsoever in getting in the middle of this dispute. Mr. Mo makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or an arbitrator for you. In other words, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Arguing over money? Are you serious? For Jesus, whether the man got a fair share of an inheritance was totally irrelevant, especially if this man could satisfy his daily needs without it. Did you hear that? For Jesus, whether the man got a fair share of an inheritance was totally irrelevant, especially if the man could satisfy his daily needs without it. Normal people might have advised him to go hire an attorney, perhaps if necessary, take it to court. But Jesus isn't normal, is he? He really has no patience with the question. If there's any doubt about what Jesus' thoughts about arguing over money or possessions, check out his comments following this parable, in the verses following this parable. And he says this, "Therefore I tell you, timeless words of promise to us. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like any one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will God clothe you, you of little faith? Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Indeed, here are some of the most comforting words in all of Scripture. Jesus, he's got us in the palm of his hand. We're like butter melting on a pile of flapjacks. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. I can almost hear the Bee Gees providing the soothing background track.
I feel you touch me in the pouring rain, and the
Come on, sing it with me. Made to love. But then, like a scratch on your favorite Bee Gees greatest hits album, Jesus has this to say in verse 33. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Okay, I can see some of you are still grooving to the Bee Gees. Jesus said, sell your possessions and give to the poor. You know, we want Jesus to talk about money and possessions in pleasant generalities, don't we? But Jesus isn't talking in generalities here. I think he means exactly what he says. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Give to the poor. It's one of those, now what are we going to do, teachings from Jesus that we just can't dodge no matter how hard we try. We have to ask ourselves, are our possessions here to serve us, or are our possessions for us to use in serving others? Reminds me of something G.K. Chesterton famously said. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried. Well, I guess we need to break here and adjust our crash helmets. Got them on tight. We'll come back to our brother and his request a little bit later. That was just the setup for the parable. So what can we learn about the rich life from the parable itself? So church, got that page wrong. There we go. The parable, let's get into the parable now. The parable starts out innocently enough. A rich man's farm produces a terrific crop. I mean, seriously, what's a successful farmer to do? Build bigger barns. Build enough storage space to store this record harvest. That's good business practice. Thank God for employers in Charlotte, North Carolina who build bigger barns and choose to hire our men at the men's shelter. But here's where the story gets interesting. Verse 19, and this is the rich man talking to himself. He says, I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Storing the surplus grain wasn't the problem, friends. It's that he was storing up grain for many years and just sitting on it. We might not think there's anything wrong with making all the money we can and doing with it what we will. Some of us might think it's our God-given right. It's the American way. But Jesus doesn't think so. For Jesus, there is something terribly wrong. This man is storing up grain for many years, and it's just sitting there of no use to anyone but the rich man. Did you notice? Not one other person is mentioned in this parable. Not one. In the parable, the rich man talks to himself. He's the center of his own little world. Nothing else matters. No one else matters. There are no other plans for his money other than to feather his own nest. All that grain could be doing so much good. And what's he doing with it? He's storing it up for many years, and sitting on it. And to be honest, that's probably where Jesus goes from preaching to meddling, isn't it? For Jesus, the money, the stuff we keep for ourselves is not determined by what we think we need for our security and comfort. What we keep for ourselves, this is strange, what we keep for ourselves is determined by the needs of others and how much we're able to share with them in their need, period. Check out Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. Give to everyone who begs from you. Another one of those, what are we going to do with this teaching? Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and Casey's always so good to remind us of that amazing life. John Wesley took Jesus at his word, and when Wesley preached his famous sermon on the use of money, he said that if we make and save all that we can honestly, and there's nothing wrong with that, But do not give all we can away to relieve poverty, feed the hungry, heal the sick. If we do not give all the money away that we can for humanity, we may be a living person, but a dead Christian. Ouch. Not even our crash helmets help us there. Well, there's no missing Jesus' point, is there? It's not our wealth, however impressive. It's not how much we get to keep that defines our quality of life. It's how much we get to give away. It's not how much money we get to keep that defines our quality of life. It's how much we get to give away. Donald Miller, one of my favorite authors, author of A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, and I'm telling you, if you haven't read this book, you got to read this book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And he begins the book with this little parable at the very beginning, and this is what he writes. If you watched a movie about a guy who wanted a Volvo and worked for years to get it, you wouldn't cry at the end when he drove off the lot, testing the windshield wipers. You wouldn't tell your friends you saw a beautiful movie or go home and put on a record to think about the story you'd seen. The truth is, you wouldn't remember that movie a week later, except you'd feel robbed and want your money back. Nobody cries at the end of a movie about a guy who wants a Volvo. But we spend years actually living those stories and expect our lives to be meaningful. The truth is, if we choose to do with our lives won't make a story meaningful, a movie meaningful, it won't make a life meaningful either. The rich man in the parable traded a deeply meaningful, deeply satisfying, a rich life of sharing and loving and giving. He traded that all in for a self-absorbed exercise in accumulating wealth, chasing after the golden Volvo. Friends, it can be so different for us. It can be so, God wants it, Jesus wants it to be so different for us. Shane Claiborne, one of my spiritual heroes today, tells a story about his time in India. They were working with 8 to 10-year-old children, and each week they would throw a party for them and just have a grand time. And Shane had grown close to one of the children, particularly close to one of the children, and he found out that it was this young child's birthday. And so Shane went and bought him an ice cream, and he gave it to the young man. And the young man just stared at that ice cream cone. He was so excited. But then he called all of his friends around him, and he had them line up, and he gave them each a lick from the ice cream cone, as if to say, this is so good, I can't keep it for myself. I can't keep it for myself. And Shane says this, in the end, that's what this whole idea of generosity is about. It's not about guilt. It's about the joy of sharing. It's about realizing that the good things in life, like ice cream, are too good to keep for ourselves. Friends, God invites us to practice a life of sharing that is always startling and often scandalous, even to those who are closest to us. But it's guaranteed to give us a joy that the world cannot take away. I'm thinking of a man named Mark Goldsmith, another one of my heroes this morning. He's a retired business executive. He spent a day at Rikers Island, New York's main jail complex, a pretty scary place. He was an honorary principal of the day at the school there. And it turned out to be a life-changing, anytime you place yourself in the path of need, it has the potential for being, I see Anna shaking her head over here, it can be a life-changing moment for you. And it was a life-changing moment for Mark Goldsmith. As he was in conversation with the young men there. And out of those conversations, he felt called to create a program for these young men when they got out of prison or jail. He called it Getting Out and Staying Out. I love that, GOSO, Getting Out and Staying Out. And it has been a wildly successful, wildly replicated program. But he tells anyone who wants to get involved in Getting Out and Staying Out that requires what he calls a passion and addiction. Being there for the guys is a 24/7 proposition. The work reprioritizes your life. The kids become your second family. They need you to be there when they need you to be there for them. Life-threatening situations don't often happen during office hours. And Mark Goldsmith will tell you that it's been some of the most fulfilling work of his life. So there we have it, two starkly different pictures. A rich man dying with his money piled around him. And then someone like Mark Goldsmith letting the needs of young men totally reprioritize, totally turn his life upside down, experiencing the joy of sharing, radical sharing, a sharing that, mind you, often confounds and astonishes the world. And so, friends, there are two questions come out of this for all of us, I think. Which of these two do I really believe is living the rich life? And what do I do now? It's probably the question we're all confronted with in every sermon that's preached in this place. What do I do now? Well, one thing Jesus makes clear in this parable is this. Today, and he makes it clear in the parable, this isn't me talking, today is the day to live the life that God is calling us to. Today. The rich man thought he had plenty of time to enjoy his riches, but he didn't. Message translation of this parable puts it this way. Just then God showed up and said, "Fool, tonight you die. And your barn full of goods, who gets it?" Wow, that sounds stark, rough. Tonight you die. Rob Bell, who was in town recently, offered up this thought. If you live in the fantasy that you'll get around to it tomorrow, that you'll get around to them tomorrow, you will wake up and it will not be tomorrow. It will be yesterday, and you will have missed it. You will have missed them. Friends, today is the day to live the kind of recklessly loving, generous life that God is calling us to. Storing up grain and then sitting on it? What's the point of that? For Jesus, that's no kind of life at all. That's no kind of life at all. Well, one last story. Years ago, I took a team of youth to Mexico. And we were doing a repair work on a church across the border from Brownsville, Texas. I hadn't thought about it in years, but while we were on that trip, I remembered that the minister who had baptized me at Trinity United Methodist Church in Danville, Virginia in March of 1958, how old am I? But I remembered that he had served as a missionary in Mexico. So one morning at breakfast, we were being served by some of the ladies of the church there, and I asked him, do you happen to know the name Robert Connerly from Virginia in the United States? And to my great shock, they said, "Indeed we do. He planted this church. He started this church." Talk about standing on holy ground. Well, here's the rest of the story about Bob Connerly. He served the first part of his career as a local church pastor. But at 52, he decided to return to school to become a physician's assistant. And at the age of 55, he got his PA degree from Duke. Don't hold it against him. And he took his medical practice to Mexico. And then he planted churches in those communities. And then the last 10 years of his working life, he was ministering to migrant farm workers in North Carolina. Bob Connerly, I'm proud to say, and I remember him this morning with great honor and pride. Bob Connerly wasn't sitting on his grain. Today is the day. Today is the day, no matter our age, to live the life that God is calling us to live. Well, that brings us back full circle to the brother. Remember him? The brother who asked the question. Teacher, tell my brother. He didn't ask a question, he made a demand. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. What happened to this guy? What happened to this guy? Makes us wonder. Did this brother who asked that original question, did he wait around long enough to get it? Did he wait around long enough to get it? Or did he impatiently walk away and try to find another rabbi in the neighborhood who would take up his cause? And what about us? What about us? Will we wait around long enough to get it? Or will we move on to another teacher who offers us more comfortable answers? And Jesus said, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in an abundance of possessions.